The International Court of Justice will tomorrow deliver an order on South Africa's application for provisional measures to stop the Israeli war that's currently raging in Gaza. Israeli forces went into the Gaza Strip in October following attacks by the Palestinian armed group Hamas, which killed close to 1,200 people and took more than 200 hostages. The South African government has told the ICJ that the Israeli government has acted with genocidal intent by killing indiscriminately in Gaza. Thousands, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians have been forced to flee, and so far close to 26,000 people, including civilians, have been killed. Let's speak now to Professor Magnus Killander from the Center for Human Rights at the University of Pretoria. A very good evening to you, Professor. Good to have your time. Everyone at this point is basically speaking about their expectations and what we're likely to hear, but it's important, isn't it, to stress once again that tomorrow's hearing will be an order purely on the issue of these provisional measures and not necessarily a detailed pronouncement on whether Israel has acted with genocidal intent in Gaza.
That's correct. I mean, the final judgment in the case we can only expect in a few years' time. So, and obviously it's two weeks now since the hearing. So, I mean, it's a quick decision on the provisional measures. It will explore some of the issues, but not in great detail that would follow in the main judgment.
And given that the ICJ is a United Nations court, how would it reflect on the court if it did not, at the very least tomorrow in the order, grant a provisional measure that would prevent or order an end to the ongoing bombardment of Gaza, given that even the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, has spoken about the need for a ceasefire at the moment?
So I think if the court would not issue any provisional measures, then the court is very much facing a legitimacy challenge from the part of the global south, similar to what it experienced back in 1966 when the ICJ said that it didn't have jurisdiction over a case on Southwest Africa, now Namibia. So that was against South Africa. But we also have to see, I mean, what will be the provisional measures ordered, if there will be provisional measures. Will it indeed be like a ceasefire as requested, I mean, the cessation of all hostilities, or will it take a different measures? And of course it will probably be a split decision with a number of judges opposing whatever the majority of the court decides.
And one of the requests from the South African government, for example, is that it wants to see reasonable measures taken to prevent a genocide. What would those be? Again, coming back to the issue of enforceability, because that is what's going to determine whether in the main the lives of Palestinians change if the order is granted tomorrow.
So I guess an order that address the issues around the siege and the indiscriminate bombings and so forth, one would see how it would be formulated, or whether it would go to full ceasefire. But of course the issue then becomes in relation to whether Israel would follow whatever the court decides. I guess they have given quite some indication that they wouldn't. But of course it's not only Israel; it's also what action would states take that support Israel with various weapons in this. In this war, and one would have to see how that plays out after a decision has been taken.
You mentioned the support that Israel enjoys, namely from countries such as the United States. You've got the UK also backing the Israeli government, even though there have been calls for a ceasefire here and there. They all are in support of the Israeli mission, as it's been stated by the government, to wipe out Hamas militants. That does not seem to have gone that well, because almost 4 months later, there's still a Hamas presence within Gaza. Just this week, in fact, the Israeli military suffered its worst day of losses as far as the number of soldiers who were killed. how much attention would the ICJ pay to what I've just highlighted?
So I think obviously they would look into the to the conduct of hostilities, but more importantly, what they see as coming later. And I mean, if we see at what has happened so far and how Israel has continued to take its very strong approach and not seemingly being too concerned about civilian casualties. I mean, even if when they responded to the case in the ICJ, tried to portray it as such. But I mean, if one look at the situation on the ground, I mean, of course, in the warfare situation that they find themselves, I mean, it is a difficult situation in that type of urban warfare, and of course, Hamas are not angels in this situation. I mean, they have taken the hostages. They're using civilian shields and so forth. But I mean, as a party to the conflict, you can't just blame it on the other side. You need to take sufficient precautions in that situation. And clearly that's not the case from the Israelis.
And on the issue of determining whether indeed Israel has acted with genocidal intent or indeed carried out a genocide against Palestinians in Gaza, that's going to happen in, let's say, Part B of hearings, which you were saying earlier could even take several years to conclude. How effective would that be?
So, how effective? I mean, the ICJ usually just issued declaratory orders. So, I mean, they would say that this and this, if they would find that there had been genocide as defined in the convention, then they would specify that this and this situation constituted that, and that would sort of be the end of their order. Back in 2007, they issued a judgment against Serbia that had been initiated in 1993, so that shows a bit the time period that can go between cases initiated and when it's decided. And then they held that Serbia was responsible in relation to the genocide in Srebrenica, but not in a wider context. Of course, here Serbia was assisting the Serbian forces in Bosnia, so it's a little bit of a different situation because here we have the state taking the direct action. But I mean, the court came under criticism because of its relatively limited definition then of how the convention should be interpreted. So I mean, it remains to be seen. There are other genocide cases, of course, that will be decided before this one.
In this instance, though,
we might get some hints in relation to that in the provisional measures, but hardly too much, and the composition of the court will change over time.
And in this instance, just considering the fact that Part B of this matter on dealing specifically with the issue of whether the Israelis are committing a genocide against Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, it makes you wonder if it'll take such a protracted amount of time, what will be left of Gaza, what will be left of the surviving Palestinians, because as things stand, there's no clear end to the ongoing war.
So clearly, as you say, I mean, the Israeli intended purpose is then to exterminate Hamas from Gaza, and as you say, it doesn't seem like they have made that much progress on that. I mean, of course, they have taken out a number of combatants as well. But I mean, the leadership and so forth seem to be relatively intact. So if they go down that route of that it's the extermination of this of that group that is the aim, then of course we are looking at something that would last for a long time to come. If they would come in more on the side of that, one should come up with some sort of more permanent solution to the conflict, a two-state agreement or something of that nature that could be supported by actors in the region and by both Palestinians and Israelis, then I guess one could make some progress. Of course, that would entail both an acknowledgement of the existence of a Palestinian state from the Israeli side, and from the Palestinian side, a acknowledgement of the right of Israel to exist.
And lastly, then, is this case overall, including what's supposed to happen tomorrow with the order on the provisional measures, whether it will be granted in South Africa's favour or not, is all of it ultimately a test for the ICJ, its standing and credibility as an institution, just given how much of the world's attention this has taken and how divided still the world is in its reaction and in what the various countries who support either the Palestinians or the Israelis, how divided they are on how the court should proceed and what would be a fair outcome, a just outcome.
So obviously the ICJ has very much a balancing act now to come up with, because it will really affect how it's viewed, in particular then from the global south, and as I mentioned, a similar situation was back in the 1960s, and the ICJ had to backtrack a few years later and develop then the notion of erga omnes that also plays in here, which is why South Africa could bring this case in the first place, because they have everyone in the world has an interest in a case of this type.
Professor Magnus Killander, good to speak to you. The professor is with the Center for Human Rights at the University of Pretoria. Thank you.